Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I'll call today's meeting to order. We have an agenda in front of us. Does anybody have any additions to the agenda? None on this side? Okay, just a motion to accept the agenda as presented, please. Councillor Phillips?
I'll make that motion.
All in favor? And that's carried. We'll move on to 3.1, and we have a delegation. I'm going to, is our delegation right there? Okay, welcome to Mr. Connor Noyes.
Hi.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Maybe we'll start with, we'll go around the table and just introduce ourselves if you would like. Let's start over here with Councillor Fraser.
Councillor Marin Fraser.
Councillor Dave Ald. Hey, Connor.
Councillor Randy Brown.
Mayor Tammy Burke.
Councillor Len Phillips.
Councillor Michelle Narang.
Dean Kraus, Town CAO.
Renee Hartling, Legislative Services Clerk.
And we also have Laura Button, our Communications Coordinator, as well as Wes Ament, our Recreation Director, in the room as well. So I will turn the floor over to you now, Connor.
Awesome. So I'll share my screen here.
There we go. We see it.
Perfect. That's great. So what I'm looking to present tonight is just, I guess, what we're looking for is to potentially, if we could have a feeding of wildlife bylaw. And I just have some information to present on some of our occurrences in town and some information on what some other towns are doing, as well as the impacts on wildlife cohabitating. So my name's Connor Noyes. I've been in fish and wildlife for coming on 4 years. I've been in Rocky for 2 years now. Posted in Grand Cat before. So just a little bit about what we do with fish and wildlife in the area that we cover. So if you can see on the photograph, kind of anything inside the green bubble is where the Rocky Mountain House Fish and Wildlife covers. This is our district, though our despite the boundaries, that doesn't limit where we go. You can see we operate from basically the Wetaskiwin County down to the Caroline Highway, and then we have that sliver that goes over to Banff National Park. The west boundary on the left there is Nordegg, and then just a couple communities to kind of show where the boundary is.
Connor,
can I interrupt for a moment and ask you to speak towards your microphone?
Sorry, yeah, you betcha.
Thank you so much.
I guess throughout the year we kind of we seasonally fulfill a number of functions. Obviously, in the fall we're dealing a lot with hunters. Come the winter, it's ice anglers. Now we're moving into the spring, and we'll typically be dealing with more of the human wildlife conflict complaints. Within the province, we do the investigations for predation. So a cow gets killed by a large predator, we'll go out and do the investigation, and then based on the findings, the cattle owner can receive compensation for that.
Connor, we're struggling with your volume a little bit. You keep cutting out.
Okay, I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to keep my head close to the computer here. Within the town, what we get is we'll get complaints from residents regarding, the most common would be folks feeding wildlife. That being people are putting out human food or even non-human food to attract deer, and it can cause some I guess neighbors aren't happy with each other. So for us, human wildlife conflict occurs whenever an action by humans or wildlife has an adverse impact on the other. So some examples that we see in Rocky would be, for instance, like crows getting at the garbage at a local restaurant, deer eating ornamental trees, compost, or being fed human food, or bears accessing bird feeders, pet food, fruit trees, and home garbage bins. The other side effect would be with having wildlife in town. We have responded to motor vehicle collisions with wildlife in town. And then also we have one occurrence of a cougar in town, which would be the wildlife. Can you guys see the photo here?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so that deer was from this winter, and this was a fawn mule deer that was being fed bread. The deer was super emaciated, and we ended up having to dart that deer. I took it to the Medicine River rehabilitation facility, and it was just kind of this deer is kind of that what spurred this whole thing. We get complaints throughout the year, and we'll talk to residents about not putting out food. Most folks are pretty good, but this one seemed to be a recurring event, and in the end, it resulted in the death of this deer. So just like we'll say, just to kind of explain how some of these interactions work. So a deer comes to town. The obvious risks to the public are that it's the motor vehicle collisions. That's a big one, and we respond to that frequently throughout the year. Deer can become aggressive when they're defending space or food. So there is one incident in town from a few years ago where dog was attacked by a deer in town. So they can encounter like a non-direct human-related conflict. So we received a number of calls this winter about a mule deer wrapped in some green cable around its leg, and there was also one a few years ago that had some lights in its antlers. And then also a couple times last year I had to go out. One was at one of the businesses in town. I had to work with one of the employees. We actually had to unbutton the chain link fence to release 2 mule deer fawns from there so we could get back to its mom. I'm not sure how they squeezed in there, but they did. They can eat non-natural vegetation or human food. And the main concern with that is that they become malnourished, resulting in death. And within the last year, I know I personally have picked up 2 dead deer from town that were just totally emaciated. We're not sure what the cause was, but it was just based on body condition, they appear to be very malnourished. Obviously, deer are prey animals, so the side effect of having prey in town would be that potentially we can have predators enter town. I don't know of any occurrences in the last 5 years that have happened in Rocky where like a cougar's come into town to specifically hunt deer. I know when I was working in Grand Cache previously, I did have a deer kill site right next to the elementary school, which obviously less than ideal. So having deer in town essentially could potentially bring predators into town. So these are statistics that I compiled essentially from 2016 till today, just for the town of Rocky Mountain House. So since 2016, we've had 48 occurrences related to human-wildlife conflict or wildlife incidents. Obviously, you can see injured deer is the primary one. Anything from a deer's got a limp to wrapped in that green cable. It could literally could be anything. So if you look at the bottom here, so the deer is in gold, bear is the light blue. So we've had a couple instances, and for the most part, these occurrences are black bears, minus there was those 2 cubs in 2019. There's 2 cubs in 2019 that were grizzly bears. A few years ago, I believe the RCMP dealt with a cougar in town. And then, so that would be the dangerous wildlife. And then as far as cougar sightings, there's 4 instances of sightings. Whether or not they're confirmed, that's just how they're documented. And monitor from there. Yeah, is there any questions about the occurrences? This is just for Fish and Wildlife. This doesn't include what the RCMP has received for complaints or what the town, if they've ever picked up wildlife or anybody else has responded to this.
So oh, did you have a question? No. I don't have any questions around the table, so you can just carry on, Connor.
So these are our recent occurrences. So yeah, 2019, 2 grizzly bear cubs in town. They're getting into garbage. 2020, there was the 1 deer tangled in the green cable. It managed to release itself on its own. Typically, we try not to intervene with wildlife, especially if it's like severely mobilized from that. We'll go out there, but this deer was walking on its own, and over time, it managed to untangle itself. There was the main presentation screen. There was the officer releasing a deer. Deer had jumped the fence to get into compost. It hung up both back legs. We let that deer go, and we didn't hear anything about it after that. It ran off. Again, the 2 fawns stuck in the work yard we released, and then this just most recently the one that we captured and took to Medicine River. So the impacts, so as far as there's obviously the human risks, but for wildlife, typically getting into bears, getting into people food the impacts aren't great on bears, my understanding. They can have a wide variety in their diet naturally, so the risk there for people would be is that when we have bears that become habituated, there's no way to teach them otherwise. So,
Connor, you're cutting
Sorry.
out again. Sorry, you're kind of really cutting in and out the whole presentation.
okay,
I'm not sure if it's our connection or.
I'm not sure.
If you have a telephone handy, you could dial into the same meeting, Connor.
Wonder if it.
Let's call in on Zoom here.
We do have the presentation as well in front of us. We have it on our computer.
Okay.
How's your audio now, Connor?
I can hear you okay.
Okay, let's try.
Okay, is that better?
No, we want you to use the second one you dialed in with. I've just asked you to unmute. There you go. Try this one.
Perfect. There we go. Okay. So you can hear me clear now?
Yep, that's better.
Perfect. So the risk to ungulates in regards to feeding can be pretty high. They have a fairly specific diet, and they largely rely on moisture within their feed. So when they're eating human food, it can really impact their body condition, and that would be the digestion portion where they have the change in diet. Habituation is obviously what's going on in the town. They come here, they feel safe, and so they don't leave, and then they'll just eat whatever is available to them. And again, having deer in town can potentially pose that risk, especially as they become, they lose that fear of humans. So we talk a little bit here about handling wildlife. So as much as possible, we really try to not handle wildlife. A mobilization can be really hard on them. And for instance, the fawn this winter, that could have been like in conjunction with its poor health. Darting is just like, its chemical immobilization is hard on smaller animals. Now, like a large deer might handle it well, but in any case, you don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be. And a part of that would be it's called capture myopathy. So when you have a high an animal that's sort of an ungulate that's really stressed out, that tension actually can result in muscular death in the body. And so they may walk away looking fine immediately after being released from immobilization, but there's not necessarily we don't track those years to find out, but capture myopathy is a risk in wildlife. For instance, for bears and deer or ungulates in general, we can move those. We don't move them unless there's a risk to the public. But for habituated bears, we don't move them, and then we don't move cougars as well, just because cougars hold territory essentially. And so if you move a cougar from one area to another, you're just disrupting kind of the natural territory that already exists, and then cougars will kill other cougars in their territory. And again, we went the rehabilitation method with that fawn, and it's viable for some ungulates and other wildlife, and some bears. We have a age limit on bears that can be taken to facilities, and there's very specific rules and specific facilities that can take them. So in the province, we have some legislation about feeding wildlife, but specifically it only talks about obviously bears, cougars, wolves, and coyotes. It doesn't apply to other animals. So essentially throughout the province, you can feed wildlife. This photo was actually from the Cow Lake campground. The two girls there had got sprayed by a skunk trying to release it from a jar, and we typically don't respond to skunks, but they tried so hard, so we went out and tried to make an effort to free that poor skunk. So this is the Crowsnest Pass animal control bylaw. They have their wildlife stuff written right into their animal control stuff. And this is everything that pertains to wildlife is on this page, and it's pretty basic. So wildlife as a meaning is defined in the Wildlife Act, and then they specifically list wildlife attractant. And then there's just really basic rules as to feeding wildlife. We felt that we like the Crowsnest Pass. I know the Fish and Wildlife and the Crowsnest Pass worked with the county to get this done. And I mean, in Blairmore, they have bear issues. It's just a part of their day-to-day where we don't experience the same bear traffic that they do through town. But yeah. But what we specifically liked about this, the bylaw here is it's just really straightforward, and what we're not looking for something that's highly restrictive. Essentially, we manage complaints on a case-by-case basis, so we're not interested in going around and checking yards for any of this stuff. What we are interested is in having an avenue to be able to respond when we do receive a complaint. And especially when we have the same households over and over again that are doing the same thing, and then we're having the same outcomes. This is the bylaw from Canmore. It's pretty in depth. It's a good sized document, and I feel that it's a little bit overly specific as for what's needed. But with a higher population density, I'm sure that they need something a little bit more strict. So for us, the priorities are we're just looking to stop the direct and indirect feeding of wildlife using a similar bylaw as for the Crowsnest Pass. It's less limiting and simple, and then officers or bylaw officers can exercise discretion based on the complaint. And we're if you would be interested, I spoke with the district officer here, and if you are interested in having bylaw authorities as it pertains to wildlife within town, we'd be happy to help out with that. Obviously, currently we don't have any bylaw authorities, But since we are responding to a lot of these calls in town anyway, we just thought it would make sense and we would offer that to you. Here for exemptions, that would be more for a county thing. I know that some of the counties use verbiage that exclude the use of bait within the Wildlife Act. That's just for during certain hunting seasons, the use of bait is allowed. This deer here was found bleeding on the side of the road, just up the Buster Creek Road. And so we just put him in the back of the patrol car and found a quiet spot and put him back out in the woods. Typically I'm not sure how the fawn wandered off, but usually the moms will leave the fawn out while they go and feed and then come back to find them. So we just put him back in a good hiding spot so the mom could come back. That's all I have.
Okay, well, thanks, Connor. So I just have a quick question about the bylaw. I didn't realize that wildlife, like I thought it was just a law that you can't feed wildlife, period. Wildlife meaning deer, bears, cougars, whatever. But you're saying there isn't any law stating that you can't feed the deer.
Right. So in the province, how we get around that in the province is we if I go out and somebody is putting out bait for a deer, I'll use let's say dumping as kind of an environmental legislation as opposed to the Wildlife Act, because under the Wildlife Act there's nothing that says you can't go out and put bait out for deer. Obviously, and this was just recent, the one regarding bears, cougars, wolves, and coyotes, that just came in the last year.
What about in a national park?
Oh, well, yeah,
That's
federally it's blanket, no feeding wildlife.
So how does their law read then? What is wildlife in the federal?
I would have to look. Because obviously Parks Canada manages that, so the enforcement wardens would have whatever the verbiage is in their legislation.
That's interesting. Any other questions? Councillor Narang?
Would a bylaw cover like bird feeders and whatnot?
And so it is in there within the Crowsnest Pass, but again, that's why you say put it in there. It's not for the intent, and like a lot of our I guess a lot of portions of the wildlife act are there not so that we go out and police those specific portions of the act, but they're there in case I need to use that. So I got a bear that comes into town. There's a bylaw that says no feeding birds. I'm not going to drive around looking for bird feeders, right? But within the Crowsnest Pass portion, it says as soon as it becomes a wildlife attractant, then it has to be removed. Based on the number of bear occurrences we have in town, bird feeders aren't my biggest priority. It would just give us a tool to say at the time that, let's say we did have a bear in town and now let's say a bear's targeting bird feeders, we have something to be able to enforce that.
Any other questions? Councillor Phillips?
So currently, right now, do you receive a lot of complaints from the public based on animals being fed in town?
Yes. I think in the last month we've had 2. So it's not through the roof, but it's enough that we kind of get steady calls throughout the year, it seems like.
Anybody else have any questions? So I think we're good. We don't have any more questions for you, Connor,
Okay.
But we'll continue this discussion later on in our agenda.
Okay,
So
sounds great.
We really appreciate you taking the time and presenting this to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out.
We will for sure. Thanks very much, Connor.
Okay, thanks.
Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Okay, so we'll move on to number 4.1, the adoption of the regular council meetings from April the 6th. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, just one observation, item 7.1 of the 6 April minutes do not include whether the motion, excuse me, was carried or defeated.
Okay, sorry, I just gotta pull those up. Sorry, what number was that again?
7.1.
7.1. Okay. Okay. Got that, Renee? Okay. I just noticed before there was a spelling, but it was an us instead of is, and I can't remember where it was, and I didn't write it down. But
Your worship, I'll find that in the.
Okay.
minutes and I'll make that change.
sure, sounds good. I'll look for it after as well. I should have highlighted it.
Thank you.
Any other? No? Okay. Just looking for motion then to accept as amended. Councillor Brown?
Make that motion.
All in favor? Carried. 5.1, Fish and Wildlife Enforcement. So I guess I'll open the floor for discussion. Are we wanting to look at some sort of a bylaw then? Councillor Auld?
I can speak to this more from a personal level. I have a lot of experience with wildlife, deer behavior, ungulates in particular. They get habituated very quickly. If they're fed 2-3 times, they know the next year to come back to that spot to get fed. I think it's a good idea. I think it's something we should look at. It just gives these guys a tool. If people are knowingly feeding these animals bread or compost material, that it'll kill them. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. So if they're not eating the proper food, and people think they're doing a good job, they think they're being helpful, but they're not. So this would definitely give these guys something that they can go up to the door and knock on it and say, there's a reason why you can't do it, and there's a bylaw in place, and please cease and desist.
Oh, Councillor Fraser?
I agree. I'm wondering if we can kind of group those, I'm going to say the unintentional attractants, the compost on the bird feeder and the fruit on the ground, as unintentional attractants. So I'm worried that if people read some of the ones that they'll think that they aren't allowed to have bird feeders. And I think that's not the purpose here. The purpose is if the attractant becomes a problem, then something needs to be done about it. Not just no bird feeders.
Any other discussion? Councillor Phillips?
I think, with any bylaw, the rationale behind them isn't for, the 98% of the people that comply. It's usually for the 1 or 2% that habitually feed the animals and bring them back into town and cause those problems. So definitely this is something to consider for sure, simply because it's obviously a problem. It's happening, and this will give Fish and Wildlife or our bylaw officers some teeth to be able to do something to rectify problems.
And I honestly thought that there was more teeth to the provincial bylaw or provincial legislation, so.
I think most of us do.
Yeah. So, Councillor Brown?
Yeah. If there's no further discussion, I'd like to make a motion that council direct admin to research the creation of a wildlife control bylaw and report findings to council May 18th. Thank you.
Okay. And Renee, you're good with that motion? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, all in favor of that motion? And that's carried. Great, thank you. Look, 6.1 is Clean Energy Improvement Tax Bylaw. I know, jeez. I'll turn that over to you, Ms. Hartling. And I know you're doing a great job on this. You just keep changing the name on it.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. It's been a little bit of a frustrating experience, but we're getting through it, and we are getting closer to actually implementing the program on a positive note. The website has gone up, And we should be, we'll be working towards getting our website up once the agreements have been finalized and we're closer to actually implementing it locally. Under the bylaw, just to get back to work here. So February 11th, the program administrator changed to Alberta Municipal Services Corporation. So initially it was EEA, or Energy Efficiency of Alberta, then it moved to Municipal Climate Change Action Center, and now it has moved to the Alberta Municipal Services Corporation. Really with the bylaws that were presented, I don't know if we can, is it possible for us to pull up a copy of the agenda so council can see? Under the Municipal Government Act, under section 63, really we can make changes without having to go back to a public hearing, because the changes to the bylaw do not materially affect the bylaw. It's just a change in the program administrator name. I did provide a couple of different copies. So there's a copy of the bylaw in red. Yeah, please. If you can make it larger as well, please. So all of the changes to the existing bylaw and the amending bylaw that were attached to the original bylaw, all of the changes are shown in red. Really, there's only two changes that don't, that basically aren't renaming the program administrator. And that is under number 23 of the bylaw. And all I did is I removed one clause, and the clause was with regards to the requirement for the public hearing prior to second reading. And I've replaced that with the public hearing was held in accordance with section 230 of the Municipal Government Act after giving notice of it in accordance with section 606 on December 3rd, 2019 for the Clean Energy Improvement Tax Bylaw. So that's when we originally passed the bylaw. And then the other change is just with regards to the repeal of the bylaws with the implementation of this new bylaw. Does council have any questions for me?
Nope.
Nope.
I don't.
Yes, okay, it's all right.
Okay, I'll make the first one. Be it resolved that council give first reading to bylaw 2021/03 to acknowledge the change in program administrator for Municipal Climate Change Action Center, Action Center, MMCAC, to Alberta Municipal Services Corporation.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, all in favor of that motion? It's carried. Councillor Auld? Mike, sorry. Sorry to interrupt.
Be it resolved that council gives second reading to bylaw 2021/03.
Okay, any questions on that? All in favor of that motion? Carried. Councillor Fraser?
I will move that council give unanimous consent to move to third reading of bylaw 2021/03.
All in favor of that motion? Carried. Councillor Phillips?
I'd like to make a motion that council give third and final reading to bylaw 2021/03.
All in favor of that motion? Carried. Okay,
Thank you, Your Worship.
thank you. Okay, so skip over 7, 8. Just a motion to accept 9.1. 9.1 is correspondence for information. There's more than.
Your Worship, if I can just speak to that, I noticed that they weren't numbered.
Yeah.
When typically they are.
Yeah.
So I've just changed the resolution to read that be it resolved that council accept correspondence for information items listed under 9.1 as information.
Okay, good. Just looking for a motion for that. Councillor Auld? All in favor of that motion? And that's carried. Moving on to the action list, 10.1. Anybody have any questions on the action list? I know I don't. Okay. Councillor Fraser?
If there's no further discussion, I will move that we accept the action list as presented.
All in favor of that motion? Carried. All right, does anybody have any administrative inquiries? Councillor Brown?
Just curious, because I've had a, Mike? Just had a couple of inquiries as to what's happening with the Eco Center gravel or mud situation.
Your worship, so I know Mr. Shanks is on that, and we brought in gravel a couple times already this year, but it's going to need some more work. I mean, it's wet and frost is coming out now, so it's problematic right now. So I think in the 2022 budget, we'll be looking at more permanent solutions for that, but like paving perhaps. But we are continuously monitoring that, and he is bringing in more gravel as required.
And just for the record, there weren't complaints. So thank you, Mr. Kraus, for that. There weren't complaints. There were actually just inquiries as to what the future looks like for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Auld?
Actually, mine is right along lines with Randy's, except for I'm going to take it a step further. I was there today. It's actually the first time I'd been there. It was busy. That place is very congested. It wasn't a close call, but there was a child that was helping and almost got into my lane of traffic that I was trying to weave through. I guess what I'm wondering about is this was a temporary solution to get us out of a situation we were in. What is the appetite about moving back to the main site before we start dumping a whole lot of money into the Eco Center?
Mr. Kraus?
Your worship, that's been some discussion among administration to weigh the pros and cons. I think I would like to bring that back to an environmental task force meeting for council's discussion. I know it is congested in there right now. I mean, there's an alternative plan to actually have one entrance and one exit versus doing the loop, because there is a curb cut on the front street that can be used to access that. But I mean, that involves cost too, putting that access in there. So I think an overall talk with council on the whole future strategy would be beneficial. And we could bring that to the May environmental meeting, council so wishes.
Right now, do they stop traffic? If there's so much, like is there room for, say, 8 vehicles or 6 vehicles, or is there a limit?
Your worship, I'm not too sure. I'd have to follow up with Mr. Shanks if they actually stop people coming in. But I think, if everyone, I mean, the flow works fine as long as it isn't busy. Mm-hmm. But I think, there's people coming in, but then they don't want to stop at the recycling bin, for example, but they want to get to the compost. So they try to, go around other vehicles, which causes a little bit of headache, I guess.
Okay.
That's what my experience was today. There was myself and five other trucks, and all of them weren't just going in the circle. Tried to get backed around and back through the one way, going the wrong way, like just trying to get out of there, because there was 2 other vehicles parked on the recycle shed side. They couldn't get through.
Oh, okay.
So it's congested, and there was another 5 or 6 people waiting to come in when I was there. So
okay,
it's definitely getting used, which is great, but it's showing its size limitations.
and we're at what now? 3.5 months in. So bring it back to the next committee and discuss it. Councillor Brown, you had?
Yeah, just to confirm what Mr. Kraus had mentioned, 2 weeks ago, I was talking to Rio and Dalton both, and the same situation happened while I was there as well. And without being asked of, Rio just said the plan is, in his mind, is to open up the north end so there's a drive-in, drive-out without having to do the loop. So he also mentioned he's bringing compactors in as well.
Right. Okay. Okay, so we'll just wait for that discussion then. Okay. Any other administrative inquiries? Any notices of motion? Okay. All right, well, it is 7:40. I will call for a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we'll be going into closed session.